cloth in ancient Africa is thought to be only 3000 BC, maybe 1000 BC in sub Saharan Africa. In ancient Egypt, it's as old as 4000 BC, even earlier. Now, what we understand about this is that these are two completely separate evolutions. But there's multiple scholars, including Ibn Battuta, including people who traversed the Nile, people who traversed Ethiopia, people who traversed the Central African Republic or Congo and those places. And they all wrote that these people's weaving methods are not only just similar, but the results of the finish is similar. In other words, the people of the world used to adopt Egyptian cotton, like Ibn Battuta, who said their clothes are of fine quality and Egyptian origin, specifying their similarities between the Malayan empires and that of Egypt. And as you can see, it's written there cotton was economically and spiritually important to the Mali Empire. According to their tradition, a spider gave the people a sacred gift, the gift of weaving. Cloth woven from the cotton they grew then became a desired commodity. Raw cotton was also an important part of trade. This is Stanley Morton, who is born at least 500 years later, and he is alleging the same thing of the cotton. And remember, when Ibn Battuta says it's of Egyptian origin, that's just a translation, but the word means origin, meaning of the same type as the ancient Egyptians.
It is, he says, the mode of spinning and weaving in Angola, and indeed throughout South Central Africa, is so very like the same occupation in the hands of the ancient Egyptians that I introduce a woodcut from an interesting work of Sir Gardner Wilkinson. So he's alleging that the spinning of cotton in Egypt, ancient Egypt, is the same as the rest of Africa, of the Africans that he encountered. And as you can see, he's very familiar when I continue to read. He even provides illustrations to demonstrate. Keep in mind, this book is not about Egypt. This person is not writing a book about Egypt. He's writing a book through the travels of Southern Africa, Congo, and basically sub-Saharan Africa. But he recognizes the similarity with Egypt, and then he makes this comparison. For example, he says the lower figure are engaged in spinning in the real African method, and the weavers in the left-hand corner have their web in the Angolese fashion. Numbers of other articles are brought for sale to these sleeping.
There are a lot of examples that I can give of multiple authors who say this over and over again, like people who talk about the Asante and everything. Every time a human population arrived in Africa and met a population that had indigenous cotton, they compare it to Egypt, especially if they saw the spinning methods. This is not a small thing, it's a huge thing. And I want to zoom in on the similarities because I've never done that for real. And I also want to zoom in on one thing that's important beyond this. So he says the lower figures are engaged in spinning in the real African method, and the weavers in the left-hand corner have their web in the Angolese fashion. So he says that the Angolese fashion and the ancient Egyptian fashion are equivalent or the same. And you can see the three at the bottom. He's alleging that's how the true African method spins. And then Central African methods are like the one that's at the top. You see the guy, the one spinning, and that's how they do it. That method you can see over there with the hanging thing attached to a separate rope. So that's what he's alleging, that one is very similar to that of Egypt. For those of you wondering, the book that he's quoting by Wilkin Gardner is a book that details the ancient Egyptian method of weaving, and it's a very long book, and it also shows how different Greek, Chinese, and also Arabic styles are from ancient Egyptian methods. One example that he gives is pushing the woof down. He says that the ancient Egyptians, quoting Herodotus says, the ancient Egyptians pushed the woof down on the looms, whereas other nations pushed the woof up. Now, it's not true in all cases that they did this, but for the majority of times they did this. And it also wasn't wholly true in Africa as well, but the majority of times they did this. And this is only one similarity. As you can see, this book is very long. There are three different methods of wefting in history. One of them is called primary wefting. The second one is called secondary wefting, and the third one is called tertiary wefting. The first one is the one that's alleged to have been done everywhere on Earth, where you separate the two parts and then you put in the thread. West African methods of and African methods of weaving became so notorious or so famous that it was one of the biggest justifications for colonizing the region, because their trade and their understanding of these weaving became a very wanted thing. And of course, they wanted some of the weaving that came from India and China, as those two places were also expert weavers. It is not known how old weaving is in Africa, because the methods used are so sophisticated for their time that it is not believed that the oldest found is the earliest. Some of these methods far outstrip the Europeans in the same period. This might be because of a highly focused people in the time, or maybe it's an arc back to an earlier time. Repetitive methods also give us an indication of an earlier time. Horizontal looms are usually used by people from Cuba, or meaning the Congolese regions, and Cameroon and Niger and those places, Ethiopia. And vertical looms are typically used by the Berbers in North Africa and the Yoruba in Nigeria. Okay, let's read it. Berbers in North Africa and the Yoruba in Nigeria use broad, upright vertical looms to weave cotton cloth, while single headed vertical looms are used in Cameroon and Congo. Portable tripods looms used by the Mande weavers are today unique to Syria. In fact, there's one more called a strip weave, which is a complete African invention, and the earliest we can find in the world is by the Telem in the 11th century.